Hi, it's Christy. I have more things to tell you, if you can believe it. So I was just thinking, one of the things I've got to work on today is creating a series of little pendants. And I thought, maybe you guys would like to watch over my shoulder while I talk about what it takes to create a handmade limited edition series of your artwork. Now, this is going to be with polymer clay, and admittedly, it's not like huge production, but it's a way that you can make an interesting design and reproduce it so that you could sell it multiple times, but still have that feeling and goodness of a homemade one-of-a-kind piece. Does that sound like a fun thing to talk about? Right? I think so too. So why don't you come look over my shoulder, and I'll show you what I'm up to. Okay, so this is what I'm working on. This is just a little series of butterfly pendants that are made to look like kind of a little wooden carved piece, right? Something simple, something sweet, something that can be inexpensive to sell on my site. Now, I made these in connection with a little online event that had butterflies as a theme. So whenever I have an event like this, I usually make some one-of-a-kind things. Sometimes they are truly one-of-a-kind, where I make a drawing or a creation, and that is part of the thing that I sell. But other times I do these limited edition series. So one of the reasons why I do something like this is because it's nice to make something that is in an inexpensive range, $5, $10, $15, $20, something like that, to where fans can grab one for relatively inexpensive and feel like they're getting something that you've touched and you've created. So let me walk you through the process. So this is the end result. It's just a simple polymer clay piece, all right? So we're going to start with the original. So what I did on this is I rolled out a little piece of polymer clay, and I just used white. You can use anything, but I like to use white. That way, when I'm making the mold, it won't leave any residual color that will keep transferring onto the impression clay. And you don't have to just use a polymer clay. You could use epoxy clay, resin, metal clay. There's a number of things that would work for this process. But I took my little piece of clay and I sculpted a little butterfly. Now, I think you can probably tell just by looking at this here, this is still just moist polymer clay. And you see all I've done is kind of use my tools to create what I wanted it to be. So here's an important part to know about creating an original that a mold is going to be made from. And that is, you have to be careful about the edges. Anything that's an undercut means that the molded material is going to go underneath, and that's going to make it hard to pull the piece out. So you want to make sure that the sides and all the details kind of go straight down. Even if you can taper it out a little bit, that just makes the release easy. But I think most of the time, if you just make sure that all those edges are straight down, nothing undercuts, you should be fine. Now, silicone, which I'll talk about in a minute, the silicone mold is a pretty forgiving substance. It's got a lot of give and flexibility to it. So even if you don't do that perfectly, chances are it's going to work out fine. But that's something that as you create, you get a little bit better at. So I made the piece. It's got a little bit of lines in here too. Some of them are kind of shallow. They don't always hold up well when I make an impression, but they do fairly good. Then I mixed up my 2-part silicone mold making material. Now, I'm not going to show you that part in this video because I have another video here on my YouTube channel that shows you how to do that. So I'll put a link to that in the description. So if you want to go and find out how to make a mold out of your 2-part silicone mold material, then you could check that one out. But essentially, I've put this on the top of it. I've made my mold. It's hardened, and I've pulled it off. Okay, so now I've got my original. I can make more molds of that if I want to. And if you want to bake it so that you always have the original to create new molds from, absolutely, that's a smart way to go. So I've got this nice flexible mold, right? Now I'm ready to do my pendant. So obviously I kind of experimented around a little bit to kind of see how that would look before I did my final offering online. And I usually sell these things in my online store. I have a couple of different things that I do limited edition series, and you can always find them there. Again, link will be in the description. So I mixed up a blend of clay, and I tend to use this color a lot. This is polymer clay. I use Primo by Sculpey, and it's white with a little ecru in it and a little translucent granite so that I can make this kind of the dirty white ivory kind of color. It looks a lot like wood. It's just a nice color. So I'm rolling it around my hands a lot. Why? It's because I'm trying to get this clay warm so that when I press the shape, it won't crack along the edges. So if your workspace is cold, then you might want to turn the heater on or warm up your hands or something, because that will have the tendency to make the clay kind of crack a little bit, which you want to be careful of. Now, one thing I like to do when I make a series like this is I offered a couple different colors, and you notice that they're all on a little bit different. They're all a little different shape. That's something that I do. I have a difficult time making the same thing look exactly the same every time. Some people are very good at that. I suck at that. So I kind of embrace that sort of chaos. Hopefully it's a balanced, aesthetically pleasing chaos. But I kind of embrace that, and I say in my series that they're all hand done. They're all going to look a little different. Nothing is going to be exactly the same. So then people know to expect that. So I've made my little disc here. I'm going to set it, and I put it sort of crookedly in there, and I'm going to press that in. So I've made it a little bit thicker so that I can have enough clay to smash down in to the molded impression. All right. And then I should be able to peel that up, and there I've got my little butterfly there. Now, the very first thing I'm going to do is put a hanging eye pin in here. So I've got eye pins. I've trimmed it a little bit. I put a little hook in the end so that I can just slide that in and do that first. Let's get rid of the hardware, all that stuff that must be done first. So I'm gently pressing that in until it just touches the top. Okay. Now I go back and I take my tool. This is a Wow It's Awesome tool. This is one of the tools from my that I've had made for myself that are just kind of a one-of-a-kind thing, and they're just the most bestest tools ever. And I go back in and just make sure that all those lines are done and deep enough so that I can kind of look at it and see if there's anything that has lost some of its details. Great, I think we're looking pretty good. All right, so now it's time for powders. I'm trying to make this look a bit like a wood grain, so I am going to grab my various brown powders here. And I've got a couple different ones that I use, and typically these are my PanPastel powders, and I kind of mix and match. So I'm going to put just a little bit here and there, and what this does is it lets all those details have color in them, so that when I lift that clay off the surface, that powder off the surface, which I'll show you how to do, it will stay in all those little cracks and crevices and really look like a wood grain, look like an antique finish. You know, you'll really get some nice detail because of that powder. Now I'm using PanPastel. This is my favorite, and there's a couple different browns here that I use. I use all the browns to make this kind of thing. And you can see that they're all like a little bit different version, because PanPastel has a special binding agent in it that kind of really grabs to the clay, and I love that. Okay, so now I've got just some Scotch tape, little sticky tape, and I'm going to roll it over the surface, rub it over the surface of the clay. And what I'm doing is picking off that top layer. Now, there's more than one way to do this, but because of the grabby nature of PanPastel, I find that the stickiness of the tape is actually the most effective way. If you want to experiment around and come up with different ways, before I discovered PanPastel, I used to use acrylic. So after paint, after it was baked, I would paint acrylic paint over the surface and then use a sponge to wipe it all off while it was moist so that it just stayed down in the cracks and crevices. So that works really well too, and that's another really effective way of doing it if you like. I like immediate gratification, so once I figured out that I could just do it with my PanPastel, and then I could immediately see how it was right at the beginning without having to wait and for it to bake and then all that stuff. Man, I liked that the very best. So now the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add a little purpleness, because that's one of the colorways that I sold. So that's just got like the little hint of purple. And you can see that I've touched it all over. It is very similar. This one's got like the whole butterfly showing. Most of these have part of the butterfly off the center, but I'm just going to make each one a little different so that everybody's looks different. So they know that that's coming. They get to be excited about what theirs looks like, and ultimately, hopefully they'll love it. Okay, so see, that was a pretty easy way to use a silicone mold over and over and over again to create a quick way to make a bunch of handmade reproductions. Pretty simple, right? So hopefully that's something helpful for you, and maybe you'll incorporate it into the next time you want to make more than one of something interesting. Happy creating!